All right, so battles, betrayals, family drama. Sounds like a hit TV show, right? But we're not talking fiction here.
Nope, this is the real deal.
We're diving into the life of King David.
One of the most famous figures in biblical history.
And our source material for this deep dive. An academic text that takes a deep dive into the second book of Samuel.
It's not just a retelling of the story, though. It really digs into the complexities of David's leadership.
His faith.
And yeah, even his failings.
Because let's face it,
Nobody's perfect.
we tend to think of David as, the Psalms guy, the harp player, the giant slayer.
Right, the underdog who took down Goliath.
But there's so much more to him than that.
Oh, absolutely. The book of Samuel paints a very human portrait of David.
It's almost like a case study in power.
How to gain it, how to wield it.
And what can happen when it goes to your head.
Exactly.
So, before we get into all the drama, let's set the stage. Who was David before he was King David?
Well, he starts out as a shepherd.
A shepherd.
Yeah, tending sheep. Humble beginnings, right?
For a guy who would become one of Israel's most iconic kings.
And was poetic.
But there's this interesting twist, even before he takes the throne.
God has already chosen him to replace King Saul.
Oh, so Saul is still alive and kicking.
Oh yeah, very much so.
Talk about an awkward work situation, knowing you're destined for your boss's job.
Well, they're still sitting there.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a recipe for conflict.
And the book lays it out pretty clearly. Saul sees David as a threat. I mean, can you blame him? You've got this young, charismatic guy, proven warrior.
And he's clearly got God's favor.
That's got to be intimidating.
It's a classic power struggle, and it gets pretty intense.
Right. Didn't Saul try to kill David at one point?
Oh, yeah. There's that famous scene where he hurls a spear at David. Not exactly subtle.
Yikes. Makes you think about those power dynamics you see even today. In companies and politics, rivalries can get pretty ugly.
Absolutely. When ambition and insecurity mix, things can get dangerous.
So how does this whole two kings situation get resolved? Does Saul eventually step down?
Well, Saul dies in battle against the Philistines.
Okay.
And that's when things get really interesting. This Amalekite shows up.
An Amalekite?
One of Israel's enemies.
Yeah.
He comes to David, claiming he finished off Saul, offering up Saul's crown and bracelet as proof.
Okay, why would an Amalekite do that? Seems a little suspicious, right? Like, what's his angle?
Right, and that's where the academic analysis gets really fascinating. It makes you question his motives. Was he genuinely hoping for a reward from David? Or was he trying to cover up something? Maybe he looted the body, or maybe even trying to stir up more chaos. It's one of those moments in the text that's open to interpretation.
And what about David? How does he react to all of this?
His reaction is actually a big deal in the story. He mourns for Saul. He even calls him the glory of Israel. And then he orders the Amalekite executed for killing God's anointed king.
Wow. So on the one hand, it seems like he's establishing his moral authority, right? Showing respect for the divine order of things.
You could see it that way.
But couldn't you also argue that it's a power play? I mean, by taking out this potential witness.
And appearing as Saul's avenger.
He's solidifying his own claim to the throne.
Is a very astute observation.
It's almost like a modern-day political campaign, right? Where image and optics are everything.
Some scholars do argue that David was a shrewd political operator, even if his methods weren't always, shall we say, ethical.
So we're seeing those moral dilemmas emerge already, even before he officially becomes king.
It's a reminder that power is rarely a simple thing.
It's a process.
And it often comes at a cost.
So it's not all celebrations and harp music when Saul dies.
No, not exactly.
What happens next? Does David just, waltz into the palace and everyone's all, "Hail, King David"?
If only it were that easy. Things get messy. The death of a king doesn't automatically equal peace and unity.
Right.
In this case. It triggers a civil war.
Civil war?
Yeah, a full-blown power struggle between the house of Saul and the house of David.
So even though David's been chosen by God, he's still got competition.
Big time. Saul's general, Abner, he takes Saul's son, Ishbosheth, and sets him up as a rival king over in a region called Mahanaim.
So wait, two kings at the same time?
Yep, you got it. Two kings vying for control of Israel.
Talk about tension.
You can bet on that.
Okay, so paint the picture for us. Two camps, each with their own king. What happens next?
It becomes this high-stakes game of political chess. Abner's got the military experience, but David have that growing popular support.
And the whole chosen by God thing going for him.
Right, exactly. It leads to these skirmishes, strategic alliances, a real back and forth.
Sounds like one of those classic history stories where you can never quite tell who's going to come out on top.
Exactly. You never know who's going to make the next move.
Yeah.
And then,
Yeah.
to make things even more complicated, you've got these personal vendettas. They just throw fuel on the fire.
Oh, yeah, that'll do it.
Like, there's this one incident where Abner kills Joab's brother, Asahel, during a battle. It's like this mini feud within the larger conflict.
So we're seeing how personal rivalries can really mess things up.
Absolutely.
Get tangled up with political ambitions. Things escalate quickly.
It happens all the time, even today. Think about political parties. Internal conflicts can derail entire agendas, or businesses, where personal disagreements can lead to really bad decisions. History repeats itself, right?
So how does David finally manage to unite everyone under his rule? Is there like a decisive battle, a big showdown?
Interestingly, no. It's not a battlefield victory that does it. It's Abner, Saul's general. He makes a pivotal move.
Abner, the guy who's been supporting Saul's son.
The one and only. He realizes that David is gaining strength, so he decides to, well, switch sides.
Wow. Talk about switching horses midstream.
He negotiates with David, tries to bring all of Israel under David's leadership.
It's a pretty bold move.
And a risky one. A huge gamble, really.
What happened?
It backfires. Big time. Tragically, actually.
Tragically.
Remember Joab, whose brother Abner killed? Yeah, he takes matters into his own hands. Murders Abner. Claims it's revenge for his brother.
Revenge, huh? Makes you wonder if there wasn't a bit of political maneuvering going on there, too. Maybe Joab saw Abner as a rival for power within David's court. I mean, if Abner's the one who brought all of Israel to David, he'd have a lot of influence.
It's definitely possible. And it really highlights how power dynamics can shift so quickly, especially in these volatile situations. You never know who's playing what game.
So Abner's out. What about Ishbosheth, Saul's son? Is he still hanging on?
Nope. With his main supporter gone, Ishbosheth, he gets assassinated shortly after. Brutal end to his story.
So with both Abner and Ishbosheth out of the picture, David's the only king left standing.
The path is finally clear. The tribes of Israel, they come together and officially anoint David as their king.
So he finally achieves what he was destined for. But this whole section of the book really shows that leadership. It's rarely straightforward. Even when you have, a righteous goal like unifying a nation, things can get really complicated.
It's a cautionary tale about the dangers of ambition, how personal grudges can derail even the best intentions. It makes you think about how leaders, even those we admire, can make choices that have devastating consequences.
And speaking of complicated choices, the sources really don't shy away from David's personal life.
Yeah.
Especially his relationship with Bathsheba.
This is where we see David's human flaws on full display. He's not just a warrior king, a gifted musician. He's also capable of making some pretty terrible mistakes.
And the Bathsheba incident, it's a turning point, right?
Yeah, it's a story about desire, power, and the consequences of trying to cover up a sin, a terrible sin.
So, for those who need a refresher, what exactly happened?
Well, David sees Bathsheba bathing.
Bathing.
Yeah. And she's married, by the way, to Uriah the Hittite, one of David's most loyal soldiers.
Okay.
David, he's completely captivated by Bathsheba. It's an abuse of power right from the start. He summons her, they sleep together, and she gets pregnant.
So not just an affair. We're talking adultery.
Exactly. And it gets even more complicated because David tries to cover it up, tries to arrange for Uriah to come home from battle so it'll look like the child is his.
Clever.
But Uriah, he refuses to leave his post. He's a man of principle, deeply loyal to his king, to his fellow soldiers. He has no idea that the king he's serving is the one who betrayed him.
It's almost Shakespearean, the irony of it all. And then what?
David, he gets desperate. He wants to hide his sin, so he orchestrates Uriah's death.
He has him killed.
Well, he sends him on this suicide mission, essentially.
It's shocking. I mean, this is the same David who mourned for Saul, who refused to harm God's anointed king.
It shows how even the most righteous people can fall. They can fall prey to temptation, especially when they have power. They feel like they're above the law. And the book, it doesn't let David off the hook. Not at all. The prophet Nathan confronts David, exposes his sin.
And what happens?
Well, there are consequences, far-reaching consequences.
So we're seeing how this one act, this transgression, has these ripple effects, impacts David's family, his reign, his relationship with God.
It sets a very dark tone for the rest of David's life. It's a powerful reminder that our actions, especially those in positions of power, have consequences, often devastating consequences.
Speaking of consequences, it seems like this incident is a catalyst for a lot of the turmoil that unfolds within David's own family. Am I right?
You are. The story of David's family. It's this complex web. Loyalty, betrayal, struggles for forgiveness. It's clear that the fallout from David's sin with Bathsheba plays a major role.
It's like a Greek tragedy, but in ancient Israel. I'm thinking specifically about the story of Amnon, Tamar, and Absalom. They're David's children, right?
Yes, all children of David. But it's important to remember, family dynamics in ancient Israel were different back then. Amnon and Absalom, they're half-brothers, different mothers. And that was significant, especially when it came to inheritance and power.
So what happens between them?
Well, Amnon, he's David's eldest son. He rapes his half-sister, Tamar.
Sin rapes her.
It's a horrific act. It sends shockwaves through the family. And Absalom, Tamar's full brother, he's furious, vows revenge.
And David, as their father and king, how does he respond?
That's a key part of the story, David. He doesn't take decisive action against Amnon.
He doesn't.
Some scholars suggest he might have been hesitant to punish his firstborn son. Or maybe he was still dealing with his own guilt over Bathsheba, whatever the reason. His inaction has devastating consequences.
So this is a case where a leader's failure to address a wrong, it creates this vacuum. Someone else feels they have to step in.
Exactly. 2 years later, Absalom arranges for Amnon to be murdered.
He takes revenge.
It's brutal. But you can understand his anger, right? His desire for justice.
It's this tragic cycle of violence. It seems to stem directly from David's own failings as a father, as a leader.
It's a reminder that our choices, even those made in the heat of passion or to cover up our mistakes, they can have unintended consequences, far-reaching consequences.
So even after consolidating his power, becoming king of a unified Israel, David's reign is still full of these internal struggles, personal struggles, struggles within his family. It's like he can't escape the fallout from his past actions.
It's a lot to unpack, that's for sure. And his story, it doesn't end there. There are more challenges, more tests of his leadership, more difficult choices, choices that force him to confront his own humanity.
So we've seen how David's choices, his actions, especially after, the whole Bathsheba situation, how they really created this turmoil within his family.
It's like this domino effect.
But the sources also highlight this other aspect of his reign, right? This idea of like the cost of power, the need for humility.
Even when you're at the top.
Even when you're king.
Exactly.
And there's this one incident that really stands out.
Oh, yeah.
Where David, he makes this decision that has huge consequences.
For his people, for the entire nation.
It all starts with a census.
A census.
Yeah, like counting people.
That was pretty harmless, right?
Yeah.
Just some administrative stuff.
Exactly. What's the big deal?
Well, on the surface, yeah, it seems straightforward.
Right.
But in the context of the story, it's a major turning point.
Okay, so there's more to it than meets the eye.
Way more. The text suggests that David, he was motivated by pride.
Pride.
He wanted to assess his military strength, almost like,
Like he was flexing a little bit?
Yeah, kind of, like he was putting his faith in numbers.
Instead in God?
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
like he forgot who was really in control.
It's like he's getting a little cocky,
Yeah, a little too big for his britches.
It's something you see sometimes, even with leaders today, right? That temptation to rely on your own strength.
Your own resources, your own smarts.
Instead of acknowledging that bigger picture,
Absolutely, it's a trap. And David, he falls right into it.
he forgets that his success, his victories, all of it.
It's because of God's favor, not because of him.
And what happens? Does God, come down from heaven and give him a timeout?
Well, not exactly, but it's definitely a wake-up call.
Okay, what happens?
God sends a plague,
A plague.
and it kills 70,000 Israelites.
70,000 people. That's a lot.
It's devastating, a real reminder that even kings,
Even kings.
they're accountable to a higher power.
To God.
And that pride, it comes with a price.
A heavy price.
It makes you think, right?
Yeah.
About what it means to handle power responsibly.
To be humble, to recognize our own limitations.
Even when we're in charge, we have to remember who's really in control.
So we've talked about David's victories, his struggles, his failings, but the sources also give us these glimpses
Into his heart.
into his inner life, his thoughts, his feelings.
The Psalms.
Yeah, the Psalms.
It's easy to forget that David, he was this incredible poet,
A musician.
a man who poured out his soul to God.
In these incredibly raw, emotional verses.
They're powerful.
And I think it's important to remember that, because it adds this whole other dimension to him.
He's not just this warrior king, this larger-than-life figure.
He's a man who struggles, who doubts, who feels pain,
He's human.
just like us.
There's one psalm that always gets to me, Psalm 22.
Oh, yeah, that one's intense.
Starts with that line, my God, why have you forsaken me? It's like a cry from the depths,
Of despair.
feeling completely abandoned, even by God,
And Jesus himself quotes that line,
on the cross.
which is, wow, that's significant.
It is. What's striking about this song, though, is the honesty.
David's just laying it all out there.
The raw emotion. He's not hiding anything. He's not pretending everything's okay.
But even in that darkness, there's this glimmer of faith.
This desperate plea for help.
There's that line later on, right? But you, Lord, do not be far from me. You are my strength. Come quickly to help me.
It's a reminder that faith, it's not about avoiding suffering.
Or pretending everything's fine,
It's about holding on to hope,
even in the darkest moments.
knowing you're not alone.
And it's amazing to think that someone like David, someone who achieved so much, who was so clearly blessed by God,
He still had those moments of doubt, of feeling lost.
it's encouraging in a way.
It is.
Because it means that even when we feel like we're falling apart,
We're not alone.
there's something bigger than us that we can turn to.
Something that can offer us strength and hope.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into David's life and times,
What have we learned?
what are some of the key takeaways?
Well, for me, it's a reminder that leadership is messy.
It's not about being perfect,
It's about navigating those tough choices, those moments of temptation.
those times when you mess up.
And it's about learning from those experiences and trying to do better.
It's also a reminder that power, it can be dangerous.
If it's not handled carefully, with humility,
With a sense of accountability.
it can corrupt even the best of us.
And I think, most importantly, David's story reminds us that even our heroes,
Those we put on pedestals,
they're human.
they have flaws, they make mistakes.
They feel pain just like we do.
They're not so different from us.
David's story is full of ups and downs, moments of greatness, moments of deep regret. And it leaves us with a lot to think about. What do you make of this complicated legacy? How does it affect your understanding of leadership, of faith, of what it means to be human? Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the life and times of King David.